Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation with the directors of the North Carolina Victim Assistance Network, we're going to talk about their struggle to get funding. The first person we're going to talk to is Executive Director Frances Battle. Frances, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, can you just give us kind of a couple of bullet points on what your organization does?
Yes, so we provide support services to surviving loved ones of homicide. And what that looks like is one-on-one grief counseling, participation in support groups where victim survivors can get together with other victim survivors who are going through the same thing, help navigating the criminal legal system, some financial support if they have to attend trial of the accused, if they have to or they want to attend the trial of the accused, and just general emotional support, all around emotional support.
So many, many layers. And you guys have been serving people here in North Carolina for how long?
Since 1986.
Wow. Okay. So historically, you've received funding from the state, correct? And
right.
And what is the normal level of funding in recent years that you've received?
So generally, we get around $550,000 a year. Now that's a combination of a couple of different sources, but that's generally what we get, and that supports a small staff. I mean, it doesn't give us the kind of capacity we would like to have, but it supports enough that we can reach the state and help people secure the services they need.
And so what is your staff? And I guess, are most of them social workers?
Most of them are seasoned victim advocates. Some are social workers. We do training as well. So we have a training arm of our organization. So we have folks that do training. And then we do contract out. We outsource some of our work.
So you have how many employees right now?
Right now, if you add in contractual and part-time, we have about 9 people.
So you lost some funding. Tell me about that. What was your level of funding that was given to you for 2022, 2023?
Yeah, it was about what I said, 550,000. We lost 400 of that in October of 2022, which caused us to lose 2 positions. Now we have secured some of that funding back. We haven't actually received it yet, but it'll only go through September of this year.
And that was a grant, correct? So that's not a recurring thing.
That is a grant. The issue there is, I mean, obviously it's a short-term solution for a long-term systemic problem. So if we don't secure funding for after September of 2023, then we just go away. I mean, our services will not exist.
Yeah. And I mean, that's obviously a really big deal. So what do you think, what's at play here? Obviously, there are lots of victims in different categories, sexual assault victims, domestic violence victims. And then, we're talking about homicide families, victims of homicide victims. Do you feel like there's a triage going on where more money is going to other causes? I mean, where are we?
That definitely is the landscape. And part of that is because the federal funding that we receive doesn't have serving homicide victims or surviving loved ones of homicide victims as a priority. So that's one of the things we're working toward changing, that we think will help level the playing field for us in terms of being able to compete for those dollars. Actually.
And that money comes from, if you'll explain it to me, it comes from federal dollars, but then that's funneled through the state and the state decides where it goes.
That's right. It comes from Victim of Crime Act funding, which is federal, and the Office for Victims of Crime in Washington, they send a certain amount of money to every state. They use a formula. They send a certain amount of money to every state. The VOCA dollars were significantly cut this past year. We knew that we would likely have a decrease in funding. What we didn't expect was to get nothing in October. And that really caused a domino effect for us in terms of losing, positions and figuring out how we were going to support the remaining positions, actually.
And this money comes through the state, through the governor's crime commission, and they're the ones who dole it out.
Yes, ma'am. And they have supported NC Van for many, many years. And, I think personally that because serving loved ones of homicide victims isn't a funding priority of the crime commission, that hurt us this year.
I want to mention here that we did reach out to the governor's crime commission about this situation, and they sent us a very thorough response. We're going to put that in the show notes, and I will read some excerpts at the end of the show in order to give you the highlights. We're going to talk more when we come back after the break with Associate Director Elizabeth Watson, just about how this organization really makes a big impact on victims' lives. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with the leaders of the North Carolina Victim Assistance Network, which lost funding recently. Joining us now is Associate Director Elizabeth Watson. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So I know in October, we had a mass shooting in Raleigh, which was just such a tragedy, 5 people killed. Tell me about your role in that. I mean, you guys were called in right away to help.
We were called in right away. We were seen as the only group that would really know how to support the surviving loved ones. And we attended outreach events. We met with loved ones, handed our information to them, and let them know we have weekly support group meetings, and we have travel reimbursement when they, if they choose to attend the court hearing. People don't really think about there's a cost associated, even if you're local, to attending court. And even if that's $3 in parking, should a loved one of a homicide victim have to pay that in order to just walk into a courtroom and face the perpetrator that took the life of their loved one? And so that's a really important service that we want to make sure people know about. And we also provide one-on-one grief therapy through trauma-informed therapists, because the grief that follows after a homicide is very different than a natural passing of a loved one. And as it is tragic and traumatic, there is a lifelong grief journey. And we want to support family members throughout the longevity of that journey.
Yeah. And as a person, as a crime reporter for many, many years, who's interviewed so many families in these tragic situations, I mean, there's no handbook. Nobody ever expects to be the loved one of someone who is murdered, and nobody knows how to be the loved one of someone who is murdered. So I would imagine when you meet these people, they're absolutely shell-shocked. I mean, this is surreal to them. Tell me about, I know you can't get specific for privacy reasons, but when you deal with one of these families, I mean, what is their first reaction often?
And that is exactly right. And when we meet with people immediately after a tragedy such as Hedingham, they are in shock. And so the best thing that we can do is share a little bit of information with them, ask them if they're eating that day, if they've slept at all, and wait for them to contact us. The thing about homicide is that we often serve people for years after the loved one is taken. So it might be a year before we hear from the majority of the community members, and that's pretty typical. Shock lasts, different time periods for different people. But when they're ready to reach out, we want to be here to provide those services.
And obviously, we've been talking in the first half of the show about losing funding and what that means to you guys. So you've had to, my understanding is you had to get rid of 2 positions. Is that where you are right now?
That is correct.
And so what does that mean for the people you're serving? Does that mean each individual in your organization has more families that they're responsible for?
Yes, it's really a capacity issue, and now we're not able to provide as much to each loved one when they contact us, because again, it's a capacity issue, and we want to make sure there's some general advocacy that we provide after a homicide. And like you shared, people don't know where to start. So often we're on the phone, we're meeting in person, talking about those different systems that they may need to navigate. And we also go to court with people when they ask for some court accompaniment. And so that is a statewide program. And as Francis shared, we have a real capacity limit.
How many people do you serve a year? Do you know? Couple hundred.
You caught me off guard. Hold on one second. I would say we serve about 800 loved ones per year.
And that would be, there are families that may have 4 members or so on. In other words, not 800 families. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes. Statistically, there are about 10 loved ones per homicide. And that is not a one-time call. This is something that we see them and we stand by them and companion them for years after the loved one is taken by violence.
Well, thank you for the important work that you guys are doing, Elizabeth. And Francis, you know, for some final thoughts on this funding issue, if you want to jump back in, what are some of the solutions here? I mean, is it really just getting this issue in front of the state to say, hey, this is something that needs to be funded at a higher level?
I think that's certainly part of it. I think one of the main things for us is we need for our services, the services we provide, and the people we serve to be a funding priority, you know, for the Crime Commission. We need our General Assembly to understand what we do and why it's important to support the work that we do. I mean, and we could talk a long time about, you know, the federal funding and what needs to happen there. That's not a lot that we have control of, but I do want to point out that the Victim of Crime Act funding that comes to all the states, North Carolina included, is not taxpayer dollars. That's criminal fines and fees. So it's not a burden to the taxpayers. We just want to make sure that there's a level playing field and that we have an equal opportunity to compete for those dollars.
As promised, we did get a statement from the Governor's Crime Commission. In it, they explained that the money to help victims comes from the federal government in the form of VOCA funding, which stands for Victims of Crime Act, money that comes from fines, fees, and penalties paid to the federal court system by offenders. The GCC then distributes this money statewide to organizations that apply for it. They tell me the VOCA funding to North Carolina has decreased by 57% in the past 5 years. For example, in 2018, they received $103 million. In 2022, they got just under $45 million. VOCA requires that at least 30% of the funding go to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, and at least 10% must go to underserved populations. And they admit the decrease is making it harder for groups like NC-VAN to get the funding they need. They tell us, quote, "We support NC-VAN and their work. The federal funding that NC-VAN and other organizations previously relied upon has been cut dramatically." They go on to say, "We are working closely with groups such as NC-VAN that are looking for new sources of funding following the loss of some or all of their VOCA funding." End quote. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.
Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.